All right. What is going on? I Coach Nutrition family. Round two today on the podcast / Facebook Live / YouTube. Coming at y'all again here with, yes, if you watched the last one, a ridiculous sunburn. Check it out. Looking like a clown, looking like a raccoon. Yeah, went snowboarding here these last few days, and first 2 days was not sunny. Third day was sun out all day, and yeah, totally failed to put on sunscreen. So here I am looking pretty ridiculous. I've been putting aloe on my face, and that's kind of helping, but yeah, everything's already starting to kind of scab up, and yeah, lesson hopefully learned this time around. But anyways, enough about the sunburn. And what we're going to dive in today, kind of building off that last podcast, was, we talked about before how to determine what a calorie deficit is for you. And so what now we're going to do is we're going to determine how to determine, or we're going to go over how to determine what a calorie surplus is for you. Now, when we think about a calorie surplus is going to be essentially the amount of calories that you consume that gets you to start gaining weight, right? We've talked about before, maintenance calories makes you maintain weight, a calorie surplus makes you gain weight, and a calorie deficit makes you lose weight, okay? So step one with this, no different than trying to figure out and determine what a calorie deficit for you would be, is to actually take an initial assessment of where your current calorie intake is at. Right. So if you use an app like MyFitnessPal or Chronometer, both free tracking apps here, you would log your food for 7 days, for at least 7 days into the app. Right. That'll give you kind of a baseline. That'll give you an initial assessment of, hey, this is how many calories I'm eating per day on average. Right. And then from there, kind of the sweet spot is creating a 300 to 500 calorie surplus so that you can gain weight. Now, a lot of you are listening to this or watching this and being like, why would you want to gain weight? Well, believe it or not, there are a lot of people that they do want to gain weight, right? They struggle with being able to gain weight. And more often than not, what the goal is they actually want to be able to build muscle. They want to be able to put muscle on, right? And so if you think about how do I gain muscle? How do I put muscle on? Well, technically speaking, you do actually need to eat in a calorie surplus in order to be able to do that. So you don't need to sit here and, eat 1,000+ calories more than what you're eating before. It's no different than the calorie deficit. We want to just do something that is actually going to be sustainable for a long enough period of time. And so 3 to 4 months is kind of that, that sweet spot, if you will, right? And so a 300 to 500 calorie surplus, that's going to really be the sweet spot. That's going to allow you to be able to build muscle with putting on as minimal amount of body fat as possible. Okay. So with that said, you've got to think to yourself, you got to say, okay, well, let me do the first step of this. Let me actually start tracking my food intake. Let me actually start to get some awareness around where my current calorie intake is at. So again, you need to be very honest with this, right? Very vulnerable, very transparent. Don't try to change anything that you've been doing for the last few weeks or for the last few months, right? And give yourself a true, honest assessment of where your current calorie intake is at. Once you do that, then we can create that calorie surplus. So going back to the previous example, let's pretend that you're logging your food for 7 days. On average, you're eating 2,000 calories per day, and you have the goal of wanting to gain weight or gain muscle, right? Hopefully, if you're wanting to gain weight, that weight is going to be muscle, right? Probably don't want to gain body fat. So if that's the case, then what we're going to do here, right, is we're going to say, okay, well, let's start off with eating at 2,300 calories per day, right? And so we're going to focus on being very, very consistent over the next few weeks, the next few months at eating in a calorie surplus at 2,300 calories per day. Now, in order to build muscle, you really need to make sure that you're working out, right? Specifically that you're doing resistance training, that you're doing strength training, right? And you're working on, building muscle, right, in the gym, as well as through your nutrition there with eating in a calorie surplus. The other side of that is that calorie surplus should make sure that you're eating an adequate amount of protein intake as well, right? It's really hard to build muscle, even in a calorie surplus, if you're under eating protein. Okay, so you need to make sure that you're eating an adequate amount of protein intake. Again, with that, the goal would be to take your body weight, right? Or if you are somebody that has more weight to lose, then you would go off your goal body weight. But in this case, if you're trying to gain weight or if you're trying to build muscle, you're probably not going to be going off your goal body weight. You're probably going to be going off your actual current body weight. So I would take that number and I'd multiply it by 0.7 to 1.0. And that's going to be the number of grams per protein per day that you're trying to consume. Okay. So eating in a calorie surplus, eating an adequate amount of protein intake, and then also prioritizing your sleep. Those are probably the three most important aspects of being able to build muscle. Number 4 actually would be making sure that alcohol intake is minimal, right? As minimal as possible. Alcohol intake is definitely something that can inhibit your ability to build muscle, even if all of those other things are taken into account. So kind of in review here, step 1, right? How do I determine how do I determine a calorie surplus? Step 1, do an initial assessment of where your current calorie intake is at. From there, create a 300 to 500 calorie surplus and focus on consistently eating that many calories per day. In a perfect, bulking phase, if you will, or muscle gain phase, it would be probably about 3 to 4 months of trying to focus on building muscle, right? From there, you would bring that number back down to maintenance calories so that you can work on maintaining the muscle growth, right? The lean muscle mass that you've built through that muscle development phase or through that bulking phase there, okay? And with that said, we also need to make sure that we're prioritizing strength training, getting in 3 to 5 strength workouts a week, that we're eating an adequate amount of protein intake, which would be taking your body weight multiplied by 0.7 to 1.0. That would be the range there of how many grams of protein per day you're trying to consume. We'd also want to make sure that we're sleeping enough, meaning 7 to 9 hours per night, and that we're keeping alcohol intake as minimal as possible. So 1 to 2 days a week of alcohol intake, maybe 1 to 2 drinks in those 1 to 2 occurrences. That's fine. Once you start getting outside of that, if you're sitting here drinking alcohol every day, I mean, good luck. It's going to make it a lot more challenging to be able to build muscle there. So if you're putting in all the work with tracking your food intake and prioritizing your sleep and calories and protein, don't sabotage yourself with consuming too much alcohol. Okay. And this would essentially be how to determine, right, what a calorie surplus would be for you. Eating in a calorie surplus, again, is going to elicit weight gain. And ideally speaking, for most of you, correct me if I'm wrong, but for most of you, I would imagine that if you're trying to gain weight, you want that weight to be muscle that's being gained. And so, not everybody has to eat in a calorie surplus in order to be able to gain muscle. But for those of you that have been consistently working out, consistently doing strength training, and you're struggling with being able to put on weight, you're struggling with being able to put on muscle, well, it's probably because you're not eating enough calories. It's probably because you're not eating in a calorie surplus there specifically. And so that's going to be something that you're going to have to prioritize. For a lot of the women that I work with here, I was just talking to a client earlier today, it can definitely be a very scary thing. Getting told to eat more calories can be something that can be scary. It can be challenging. You can think that you're going to gain all this body fat or gain all this weight, but if you do it the right way, right, and you actually track this data and you do things how I've talked about here today, and you're actually doing it consistently, you shouldn't have those worries. You should be able to gain muscle while gaining a very, very minimal amount of body fat, if any at all there. And again, this is not a forever thing. This is something that you're going to work on ideally for 3 to 4 months, and then you're going to bring yourself back to maintenance calories to maintain the muscle growth that you've been able to develop, the lean muscle mass that you've been able to build, right? And then from there, you can start going into another phase, whether you want to just maintain where you're at or go into a dieting phase. But ultimately, this is a great thing for you to do if you've never done it before. Again, the more lean muscle mass that you have on you, the higher your metabolism is going to be, the more flexibility, the more freedom and flexibility you're going to have with your nutrition in terms of being able to eat more calories, right, in order to be able to maintain your weight. And not to mention, if you can gain muscle through non-dieting phases, then it's going to set you up to be a lot more successful when it does come time to do a dieting phase, right? And to eat in a calorie deficit to lose body fat, right? So just some nuggets here. I could expand on this a lot more and get a lot more detailed with this, get a lot more specific, but again, the goal here with this was to be as easy as possible, to simplify this as much as possible So I hope this helps. If you have any questions at all, be sure to drop them in the comments below. Send me a DM, send me an email. But again, this was how to determine what a calorie surplus would be for you. So hope you have a great day. Thank you so much. Appreciate y'all. And one more laugh at my amazing clown / raccoon sunbird. See you guys.